Officer Blake Wilson smirks as he approaches the luxury sedan. Another wealthy black woman to intimidate. Jasmine Carter remains composed, secretly activating her recording device. Neither realizes this routine traffic stop will destroy his career and transform the justice system forever. Before we dive into this shocking story of justice and accountability, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more true stories about people standing up against injustice. Now let's find out how one woman's preparation and courage brought down a corrupt police officer who picked the wrong target. Jasmine Elise Carter was not a woman who attracted attention accidentally. At 35 years old, she had cultivated the kind of presence that commanded respect without demanding it. The youngest black female state Supreme Court justice in Georgia history, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who knew her worth in a world that often tried to diminish it. Born to working-class parents in Savannah, Jasmine had defied every statistical prediction about her future, earning a full scholarship to Howard University for her undergraduate studies before completing her law degree at Harvard, where she at Devon.com graduated top of her class. Her rise through the legal ranks had been meteoric, but hard-earned, each step requiring twice the effort of her white counterparts to receive half the recognition. Still, she persevered, building a reputation as a brilliant corporate attorney known for her razor-sharp mind and uncompromising ethics. Her appointment to the state Supreme Court 6 months ago had made national headlines, though she took more pride in the message it sent to young black girls across Georgia than in any personal accolade. This evening, Jasmine was driving home from a late-night strategy meeting regarding a landmark discrimination case that would come before the court next week. The weight of responsibility sat heavily on her shoulders as she navigated her Bentley Continental through the wealthy Atlanta suburb of Buckhead. Though she could afford to live in this exclusive neighborhood, Jasmine had chosen a home in a historically black community, instead believing in the importance of remaining connected to her roots. Her father, a retired high school principal, had instilled in her early lessons about navigating racism while maintaining dignity. "Never let them see your anger," he would say, "but never let them take your pride." Those words had guided her through countless microaggressions in boardrooms, courtrooms, and social events where she was often the only black woman present. Tonight, as the clock approached 11:30, Jasmine noticed the headlights behind her had been following for several blocks. A prickle of unease traveled down her spine, a sensation she had learned to trust. When the lights suddenly flashed blue and red, she felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. It wasn't fear exactly, but the weary anticipation of yet another unnecessary interaction with law enforcement. This was the third time she had been pulled over in Buckhead this year, despite her meticulous adherence to traffic laws. After the second incident, Jasmine had invested in a comprehensive security system for her vehicle, one that activated automatically during police stops. As she pulled to the curb on the quiet tree-lined street, her manicured finger discreetly pressed a button beneath the steering wheel, initiating the Carter Protocol, as she had come to call it. Hidden cameras and microphones throughout her vehicle activated instantly, uploading a live stream to secure servers. The system also sent automated alerts to 3 trusted contacts, including her close friend and mentor, Governor Patricia Reynolds. The two women had met during Jasmine's time in corporate law, when Reynolds, then a state senator, had been fighting for criminal justice reform. Their shared passion for equity under the law had forged a powerful alliance that eventually blossomed into friendship. Reynolds had been instrumental in championing Jasmine for the judicial appointment, recognizing that her combination of legal brilliance and lived experience would bring vital perspective to the court. As Officer Blake Wilson approached her vehicle, Jasmine took a deep breath and placed her hands visibly on the steering wheel, just as her father had taught her decades ago. Through her rearview mirror, she observed the officer's confident swagger, noting the way his hand rested casually on his holstered weapon. She also noted that his body camera appeared to be off, the telltale red recording light nowhere to be seen. Jasmine's pulse quickened, but her expression remained placid as she lowered her window. Years of facing down powerful opponents in courtrooms had perfected her poker face. She would need it tonight, though she couldn't possibly know just how much. The luxury car's interior light illuminated her elegant features as she waited for Officer Wilson to reach her window. Her designer suit and subtle diamond earrings spoke of wealth, but it was her calm, steady gaze that truly reflected her power. Jasmine had no way of knowing that this routine traffic stop was about to become the catalyst for the most significant police reform in Georgia's history, or that the man approaching her vehicle had selected her as his next victim. As Wilson's shadowy figure loomed outside her window, the Carter Protocol continued its silent operation, capturing every moment of what was about to unfold. Jasmine's security system was designed not just to record, but to protect with features she had customized based on her understanding of legal procedures and constitutional rights. It would prove to be the most important investment of her career. Officer Blake Wilson had been with the Atlanta Police Department for 17 years, long enough to know exactly how to work the system to his advantage. At 42, his once athletic build had softened around the middle, but he still carried himself with the cocky authority of someone who believed a badge gave him absolute power. He hadn't always been corrupt. There was a time early in his career when he genuinely wanted to serve and protect. But that idealistic rookie had vanished years ago, eroded by a toxic combination of departmental politics, personal prejudices, and mounting financial troubles. Wilson had grown up in a small Georgia town, where racism wasn't just common, it was practically a community value. His father, a factory worker with a fifth-grade education, had filled his son's head with resentment toward anyone who wasn't white, especially those who achieved success. "They're taking what should be ours," his father would slur over cheap whiskey, a mantra that embedded itself in Blake's worldview. Now patrolling the wealthy neighborhoods of Atlanta, Wilson seethed each time he saw a minority, driving an expensive car or living in a mansion. In his mind, they didn't deserve such success, couldn't have earned it legitimately. His gambling addiction had started innocently enough with poker nights among fellow officers. But over the years, it had grown into a consuming problem that had him thousands of dollars in debt to people who didn't make polite requests for repayment. His police salary couldn't cover his mounting losses, and his ex-wife had already drained him with alimony payments. It was Sergeant Michael Franks who had first suggested their supplemental income strategy 3 years ago. Franks, a 20-year veteran with connections throughout the department, had noticed how traffic stops could become profitable with the right approach. Their scheme was elegant in its simplicity: identify wealthy minorities driving through upscale neighborhoods, manufacture a reason to pull them over, then intimidate them into surrendering cash or valuables through threats of arrest, drug charges, or civil asset forfeiture. They targeted minorities specifically because, as Franks had coldly explained, they're less likely to be believed if they complain, and they know it. Their victims typically chose to surrender a watch, some cash, or jewelry, rather than face the prospect of entering a justice system stacked against them. Wilson and Franks had developed an efficient selection process for their targets. They looked for luxury vehicles driven by minorities in wealthy areas, particularly at night when fewer witnesses would be around. They would run the license plate to assess the owner's financial status, looking for individuals who appeared to have money but lacked powerful connections. They specifically avoided politicians, celebrities, or anyone with obvious influence. Their technique had been refined over dozens of successful stops. Wilson would approach aggressively, immediately establishing dominance. He would claim to smell marijuana or alcohol, or allege erratic driving patterns that conveniently occurred just outside the range of dashboard cameras. Once he had the driver sufficiently intimidated, Franks would arrive as backup, escalating the pressure. Together they would suggest that an immediate resolution might be possible to avoid arrest and impoundment. Most victims handed over valuables within 15 minutes, relieved to escape with just financial loss, rather than potential violence or legal entanglement. Tonight, when Wilson spotted the Bentley Continental with a black female driver, he felt a familiar surge of anticipation. He ran the plate and found it registered to Jasmine E. Carter with an address in a historically black neighborhood. The vehicle's value alone indicated wealth, and her choice to live outside. Buckhead suggested to Wilson that she was likely new money, perhaps an athlete's girlfriend or an entertainer. someone who wouldn't have powerful friends in the system. What his database search failed to reveal was her position on the state Supreme Court, a critical oversight that would prove catastrophic for him. As Wilson radioed in that he was making a routine traffic stop, he deliberately forgot to activate his body camera. It was a common practice among certain officers who preferred to operate without scrutiny. He signaled for the Bentley to pull over, already calculating what valuables the driver might be wearing. He'd developed an eye for spotting real designer items versus knockoffs, real jewelry versus costume pieces. As he approached the vehicle, he noticed the elegant silhouette of the driver sitting perfectly still with hands visible on the steering wheel. Something about her composure gave him momentary pause, but he brushed it aside. In his experience, even the most confident targets broke quickly under the right pressure. Wilson didn't know that Jasmine Carter had faced down corporate titans and political power brokers in courtrooms across the country. He had no idea that she had been racially profiled so many times that she had developed not just emotional resilience, but technological countermeasures. He couldn't see the hidden cameras recording his every move or know that his badge number was already being transmitted to the governor's office. Tonight, Blake Wilson was about to learn a painful lesson about power privilege and the consequences of underestimating a target based on race and gender. As he adjusted his belt and adopted the intimidating swagger he had perfected over years of corrupt stops, Wilson was walking directly into a trap of his own making. License and Registration Officer Wilson barked deliberately, omitting any greeting or explanation for the stop. His flashlight beam swept intrusively across Jasmine's face, then down to her designer suit and the elegant watch on her wrist. Wilson made a mental note of the Patek Philippe timepiece that had to be worth at least $40,000. Jasmine maintained perfect composure, her movements deliberate and unhurried, as she retrieved her license and vehicle registration from her glove compartment. "May I ask why I've been pulled over, officer?" she inquired, her voice level and controlled. Wilson's expression hardened at her question. He wasn't accustomed to direct inquiries from his targets this early in the encounter. Most were too intimidated to do anything but comply. "I observed your vehicle swerving erratically," he lied smoothly. "Have you been drinking tonight, ma'am?" The accusation hung in the air, both of them knowing it was fabricated. Jasmine had consumed nothing stronger than sparkling water at her meeting. "No, officer. I don't drink alcohol at all," she replied evenly. Wilson leaned closer, invading her personal space deliberately. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle, ma'am. I detect the odor of marijuana." This was another standard false claim in his repertoire, one that courts had repeatedly ruled provided sufficient probable cause for a search. Jasmine recognized the tactic immediately, but also understood the potential danger of non-compliance. With measured movements, she unfastened her seatbelt. "Officer, I'd like to note that I have not consented to any search of my vehicle or person, and I do not use marijuana or any illegal substances. I'm complying with your order to exit the vehicle under protest." Her formal, precise language triggered something in Wilson. This wasn't the typical response of a scared civilian. She sounded more like a lawyer, which raised a warning flag. Still, the expensive watch and car convinced him to proceed. As Jasmine stepped out of the car, Wilson noted her height, nearly matching his 6-foot frame in her modest heels. Her posture remained impeccable. Spine straight, shoulders back, chin slightly raised, the stance of someone unaccustomed to cowering. "Place your hands on the hood of the vehicle and spread your feet," Wilson commanded, his tone deliberately harsh. Again, Jasmine complied, while clearly stating, "I'm following your instructions under protest, officer. There is no legal basis for this detention or search." Wilson ignored her protest and began a pat-down that lingered inappropriately at her hips and under her suit jacket. Jasmine's expression remained neutral, though her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What brings you to this neighborhood so late?" Wilson asked, a common question in his arsenal designed to make the target defensive. "I'm on my way home from a work meeting," Jasmine replied, simply offering no elaboration. Wilson snorted derisively. "Work meeting. Right. At 11:30 at night. What kind of work is that?" The implication in his tone was clear and deeply offensive. "I'm an attorney," she answered, choosing not to reveal her judicial position yet. It was a test to see how far he would take this harassment with even this level of professional disclosure. And Attorney Wilson repeated with exaggerated skepticism, "And I suppose that's how you afford a car like this." Legal work. The emphasis he placed on legal carried his insinuation that her wealth must have come from illegitimate sources. Wilson began a search of her vehicle without consent, rifling through her designer briefcase and the small suitcase in her back seat that contained a change of clothes for long workdays. "Look what we have here," he announced, pulling out a small pill case from her purse. It contained her prescription allergy medication. "Care to explain these, counselor?" His tone was triumphant, as though he'd discovered evidence of wrongdoing. "Those are prescription antihistamines for my seasonal allergies." "The prescription information is printed on the case," Jasmine replied calmly. Wilson seemed disappointed but continued his illegal search. When his radio crackled, he stepped away briefly to respond. "Yeah, Frank, I could use some backup at my location. Got a situation here." Within minutes, Sergeant Michael Franks arrived, his patrol car pulling up behind Wilson's with lights flashing but no siren. The two exchanged a look that Jasmine didn't miss, a silent communication between conspirators. Franks approached with the same intimidating posture as Wilson. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, directing the question to his colleague rather than to Jasmine. "Possible narcotics situation," Wilson replied, though he had found nothing illegal. "And potential civil asset forfeiture case. Driver seems to have items of value that might be connected to illegal activity." The mention of civil asset forfeiture was the first clear indication of their true intentions. This legal but highly controversial practice allowed police to seize property they claimed might be connected to criminal activity even without charging the owner with a crime. It was a tactic frequently abused by corrupt officers. Do you believe Officer Wilson is simply doing his job, or is he targeting Jasmine because of her race? Type number 1. In the comments, if you think this is clear racial profiling, and hit that like button if you've ever witnessed or experienced something similar. Can you imagine the courage it takes to remain calm when facing such blatant intimidation? How would you respond if you were in Jasmine's position? Subscribe to find out what happens when these corrupt officers realize they've targeted someone with more power than they anticipated. "Ma'am, we have reason to believe that some of your possessions may be connected to illegal activities," Sergeant Franks stated with practiced authority. "We'll need to inspect your jewelry, wallet, and any other valuables you have on your person." Jasmine's eyebrow raised slightly, the first crack in her composed facade. "On what grounds, Sergeant?" "You found no evidence of any illegal activity because there is none." Frank stepped closer, using his bulk to loom over her. "We don't need to find drugs to initiate forfeiture procedures. The suspicion is enough under Georgia state law." This was a gross misrepresentation of the law, but one that had successfully intimidated many previous victims. "Perhaps I could call my attorney to clarify the legal requirements for civil forfeiture in this state," Jasmine suggested, reaching slowly toward her pocket. "That won't be necessary." Wilson snapped his hand, moving to his weapon in a subtle threat. "Hand over your phone, wallet, and that watch. We'll provide a receipt for everything, of course." His tone had shifted from authoritative to almost pleased, the pretense of legitimate police work dropping away. Jasmine noted the change, understanding they had reached the true purpose of this stop. She stood perfectly still, making no move to surrender her possessions. "I believe you're attempting to rob me under color of law, officers. That's a federal crime." Her direct accusation hung in the air between them. Wilson's face darkened with anger. "Watch your mouth. One call, and you'll spend the night in jail. Good luck explaining that to your law firm tomorrow." The threat was explicit now. Jasmine's safety or freedom in exchange for her valuables. It was extortion, plain and simple. "I think," she said with remarkable steadiness, "that you gentlemen have made a significant error in judgment tonight." There was something in her tone, a quiet certainty that finally penetrated Wilson's arrogant confidence. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed his features. But rather than retreat, he doubled down. "Cuff her," he ordered Franks, resisting an officer interfering with police business. As Franks roughly grabbed her wrists, Jasmine spoke clearly and calmly. "My name is Justice Jasmine Carter of the Georgia State Supreme Court. Everything that has happened since you pulled me over has been recorded and is being live-streamed to secure servers accessible to the governor's office. I suggest you remove these handcuffs immediately." The officers exchanged glances, uncertainty finally breaking through their confident facade. Was she bluffing? Could she really be a Supreme Court justice? And most alarmingly, was everything truly being recorded? Before they could decide how to proceed, a distinctive ringtone sounded from Jasmine's pocket, a ringtone she had specifically assigned to only one contact. Jasmine stood perfectly still, hands cuffed behind her back as the distinctive ringtone continued. The moment hung suspended between them, the chirping phone creating an unexpected disruption to the officer's carefully choreographed intimidation routine. "I need to answer that," she said calmly. "That particular ringtone is programmed for emergency contacts only." Wilson scoffed, trying to maintain control of the situation that was rapidly slipping away from him. "Nice try. You'll have plenty of time to make calls from the station." He turned to Frank, suddenly eager to wrap up this encounter that had taken an unsettling turn. "Let's get her in the car." But Jasmine was not finished. "Before you take that step, officers, you should know that my security protocol automatically sends my GPS coordinates and a live stream of this encounter to my emergency contacts when activated. That phone call is likely someone responding to that alert. Refusing to allow me to answer could add additional charges when this situation is reviewed." The precision of her language and the specific references to security protocols planted the first real seed of doubt in Wilson's mind. This woman didn't sound like she was bluffing. She sounded like someone who had prepared extensively for exactly this type of encounter. "Your fancy lawyer talk doesn't impress me," Wilson said, but his voice lacked its previous confidence. "I've heard every excuse in the book from people trying to avoid arrest." Jasmine's expression remained unchanged. "This isn't an excuse, Officer Wilson. It's a statement of fact. In approximately 3 minutes, the failure to receive confirmation of my safety will trigger an escalation protocol that automatically contacts the State Attorney General's office." She spoke with such certainty that even Franks looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight and glancing at Wilson for direction. The phone stopped ringing, and the silence that followed seemed to amplify the tension. Then a notification sound pinged from inside the patrol car, followed quickly by the crackle of the police radio. "Unit 23. Please verify your current status and location." The dispatcher's voice had an unusual urgency to it. Wilson hesitated, then walked to his vehicle to respond, leaving Franks guarding Jasmine. "Unit 23. Status routine traffic stop on Peachtree Road near the intersection with Maple Drive." His response was professional, giving no hint of the actual situation. The dispatcher's reply came immediately. "Unit 23. Be advised we have received an inquiry from the governor's office regarding your current stop. Please confirm the name of the individual you have detained." Wilson's blood ran cold. The governor's office. How was that possible? He looked back at Jasmine, seeing her for the first time not as a target but as a potential threat to his career and freedom. "Dispatch, can you repeat that last transmission?" He stalled, mind-racing through possible explanations and escapes. "Unit 23. The governor's office is requesting immediate confirmation of the identity of the individual currently detained at your location. Please respond." The formality of the request and the mention of the governor twice left no room for evasion. Wilson walked back to Jasmine, his confident swagger replaced by a stiff, uncertain gait. "What exactly did you do?" he demanded, voice low and threatening. Jasmine met his gaze unflinchingly. "I didn't do anything, Officer Wilson. My security system did exactly what it was designed to do when I activated it at the beginning of this unlawful detention. It recorded everything, uploaded the live stream to secure servers, and alerted my emergency contacts, one of whom happens to be Governor Patricia Reynolds." As if on cue, her phone began ringing again with the same distinctive tone. Wilson, now visibly sweating despite the cool night air, nodded sharply to Franks. "Uncuff her." Franks hesitated. "Blake, are you sure? That's the smart play here? If she's lying, we lose all leverage." but Wilson had already recognized the shifting power dynamic. "Do it," he hissed. "Now." As Franks reluctantly unlocked the handcuffs, Jasmine maintained her composure, not even rubbing her wrists despite the discomfort. She reached slowly into her pocket and withdrew her phone, showing the screen to both officers. The caller ID clearly displayed Governor Patricia Reynolds, along with a photo of Jasmine and the governor at an official function. She answered on speakerphone, her voice steady. "Governor Reynolds, I'm currently being detained by Officers Blake Wilson and Michael Franks of the Atlanta Police Department on Peachtree Road. They've conducted an illegal search of my vehicle, and person without probable cause placed me in handcuffs without justification and attempted to coerce me into surrendering my valuables through implied threats and misrepresentation of civil forfeiture laws." The clarity and precision of her summary left the officers stunned. There was a brief pause before the governor's authoritative voice filled the night air. "Justice Carter, are you injured?" The title Justice hit the officers like a physical blow. Franks actually took a step backward, his face draining of color as the reality of their situation began to dawn on him. "No, Governor, I am uninjured, though the handcuffs were unnecessarily tight." Jasmine's composed response carried no hint of the fear or anger another person might have displayed. Officers Wilson and Franks, "This is Governor Patricia Reynolds," the voice on the phone stated with ice-cold authority. "I'm currently looking at a live stream of this encounter from the beginning. State police have been dispatched to your location, and I expect both of you to remain there. Do not touch Justice Carter or her belongings. Do not attempt to seize or damage any recording devices. Is that understood?" Wilson's mouth opened and closed without producing sound, the practiced intimidation tactics utterly useless in this unprecedented situation. It was Franks who finally responded, already distancing himself from his partner. "Yes, Governor. Understood completely. There must be some misunderstanding here. We were just conducting a routine traffic stop and became concerned about possible impairment." The attempt at creating a cover story came too late. "Sergeant Franks, save your explanations for the internal affairs investigation that will begin tomorrow morning," the governor replied tersely. "I can see and hear everything that has transpired. Justice Carter State Police should arrive within minutes. Are you comfortable remaining at the scene until then?" Jasmine nodded, then remembered to verbalize her response. "Yes, Governor. I'll stay to provide a full statement." The sound of distant helicopters became audible, growing louder with each passing second. Wilson's face contorted with the sudden realization that his career, his freedom, and his future were evaporating before his eyes. In a desperate, ill-conceived move, born of panic, he lunged for Jasmine's phone. "Give me that. This is police business." But Jasmine, anticipating his reaction, stepped smoothly aside. His momentum carried him forward, off balance and overextended. "Officer Wilson just attempted to seize my phone," Governor Jasmine reported calmly. The attempt was unsuccessful. The helicopter was now clearly visible, its searchlight sweeping the street as multiple police cruisers with state police markings rounded the corner lights flashing. "Blake, don't make this worse," Franks urged, already calculating how to save himself by cooperating. "It's over." Wilson stood frozen in the harsh glare of the searchlight. 17 years of police work and 3 years of systematic corruption culminating in this moment of absolute exposure. As state police officers emerged from their vehicles with weapons drawn, Jasmine Carter remained perfectly still, her expression revealing nothing of the complex emotions beneath. The power had shifted completely, the hunter becoming the hunted, the would-be victim, now holding all the cards. The corrupt officer who had targeted her based on race and gender assumptions was about to learn a harsh lesson about consequences, one that would ultimately cost him 28 years of his life. The state police approached with tactical precision, their movements reflecting their elite training. Justice Carter, the lead officer, called out, lowering his weapon as he recognized her. "I'm Captain Reynolds, State Police Tactical Response. Are you all right, ma'am?" The coincidence of his surname with the governor's didn't escape Jasmine's notice. "I'm unharmed, Captain," she confirmed, "though I believe Officers Wilson and Franks should be secured immediately." Her calm authority in the chaos spoke volumes. Captain Reynolds nodded sharply to his team, who moved to detain the two local officers. "Hands behind your back, gentlemen," he ordered. Wilson, finally comprehending the magnitude of his mistake, began protesting loudly. "This is jurisdictional overreach. You have no authority to detain Atlanta PD officers conducting legitimate police business." Captain Reynolds remained unimpressed. "By order of Governor Reynolds, you're being detained pending investigation of civil rights violations, attempted robbery under color of law, and corruption. You can discuss jurisdictional concerns with the federal prosecutors who'll be joining this case by morning." As state officers secured the two men with handcuffs, Jasmine's phone, still connected to the governor, captured every word. "Justice Carter," the governor's voice came through clearly. "I've spoken with the Attorney General and the Commissioner of Public Safety. This incident has their full attention. A special prosecutor will be appointed by morning." The swift mobilization of resources demonstrated the seriousness with which the state government was treating the situation. The implications extended far beyond a single traffic stop. Jasmine nodded, maintaining her professional demeanor, despite the vindication she must have felt. "Thank you, Governor. I appreciate the prompt response." Wilson, now fully restrained and being led to a state police vehicle, turned back toward Jasmine with a mixture of rage and desperation on his face. "You set me up. This was entrapment." The accusation echoed in the night air, drawing contemptuous looks from the state officers. Jasmine merely raised an eyebrow. "Officer Wilson I installed security measures in my vehicle after being racially profiled twice this year. The fact that those measures captured you attempting to rob me doesn't constitute entrapment. It constitutes evidence." Her precise language and unflappable composure only seemed to enrage Wilson further. "You don't know who you're messing with. I have friends in the department." His threats sounded hollow even to his own ears as he was firmly placed in the back of the police cruiser. Franks, by contrast, had already shifted to self-preservation mode. "I want to cooperate fully," he announced to anyone who would listen. Wilson was the ringleader. "I can provide names, dates, victims, everything." His quick betrayal of his partner spoke volumes about the depth of their corruption and the fragility of honor among thieves. Captain Reynolds approached Jasmine with professional respect. "Ma'am, we'll need a full statement from you. Would you prefer to do that here or at headquarters?" Before she could answer, the distinctive sound of an executive helicopter approaching drew everyone's attention. The aircraft bearing the seal of the state of Georgia circled once before, settling on the wide avenue that had been cleared by state police. Governor Patricia Reynolds emerged moments later, flanked by security personnel. At 62, the governor cut an imposing figure with her silver hair and impeccable pantsuit. She moved directly to Jasmine, embracing her briefly, before stepping back to assess her. "When I received the alert from your system, I knew something was wrong. You never trigger false alarms." The personal connection between the two powerful women was evident, transcending their professional relationship. Jasmine nodded. It functioned exactly as designed. Every moment from the initial stop has been recorded and backed up to multiple servers. The governor's expression hardened as she glanced toward the police cruisers containing Wilson and Franks. "I watched enough of the live stream to understand what was happening. Those men weren't just violating procedure. They were executing a practiced routine of intimidation and theft." She turned to Captain Reynolds. "I want their homes and lockers searched immediately. Get warrants for their financial records, phone records, everything. This wasn't their first time." The captain nodded sharply. "Already in process. Governor, Judge Watkins, issued the warrants 10 minutes ago." The efficiency of the response team suggested this wasn't the first corruption case they'd handled, though perhaps it was the first involving such a high-profile victim. Wilson watched helplessly from the back seat of the cruiser as his world collapsed around him. The arrival of the governor in person signaled the political significance this case would assume. It wasn't just about one corrupt cop anymore. It was about systemic issues that would be examined in the harsh light of public scrutiny. Meanwhile, Atlanta Police Department leadership had been notified and were rushing to the scene, undoubtedly preparing damage control strategies. The commissioner himself arrived within 20 minutes, his face ashen as he surveyed the situation. Governor Reynolds wasted no time. Commissioner Bennett, I expect full cooperation with the state investigation. This incident suggests a pattern of behavior that may extend beyond these two officers. The commissioner nodded tersely, understanding that his own leadership was now under scrutiny. You'll have our complete cooperation, Governor. This behavior does not represent our department's values. His platitudes sounded hollow in the face of the night's events. A state police technician approached Jasmine respectfully. Justice Carter, we've accessed your vehicle's security system as requested. The footage is remarkable in its clarity. The multiple camera angles and audio quality are unlike anything I've seen in a civilian vehicle. Jasmine nodded. After the second profiling incident, I consulted with security experts to design a system that would provide irrefutable evidence. It activates automatically when emergency lights appear behind my vehicle and captures everything from multiple angles. It uploads continuously to secure servers that not even I can delete or alter. The technician looked impressed. This will make prosecution much simpler. There's no room for the usual he said, she said arguments that plague most profiling cases. As the initial chaos organized itself into a structured investigation, Jasmine finally allowed herself to sit down in a state police vehicle, the adrenaline beginning to ebb from her system. Governor Reynolds joined her, closing the door to give them a moment of privacy. You knew something like this might happen one day, the governor observed. It wasn't a question. Jasmine nodded, the first sign of emotion finally showing in her eyes. I've been pulled over 26 times in my life, Patricia. 26 times, and I've never received a single ticket. Never been charged with anything. Just detained, questioned, and released once they realized I was one of the good ones. The bitterness in her final words revealed the accumulated weight of a lifetime of such experiences. The governor placed a hand on her shoulder. This ends tonight. What those officers did to you, they've done to others without your resources or position. This case will be the catalyst for the reforms we've been pushing for. Jasmine straightened her shoulders, her moment of vulnerability passing. Then let's make sure it's airtight. I want a task force, independent investigators, and full transparency with the public. The governor nodded. You'll have it all. By morning, this will be national news. By next week, we'll have identified every victim those officers targeted. And when the dust settles, we'll have the political capital to push through the Police Accountability Act that's been stalled in committee. As they spoke, forensic teams were already processing both police cruisers and Jasmine's Bentley. Body cameras and dashboard cameras from all responding officers were being collected as evidence. Witness statements were being taken from residents who had emerged from nearby homes drawn by the commotion. The night that had begun as a routine example of racial profiling was transforming into a watershed moment for police accountability in Georgia. For Officer Blake Wilson, watching from the back seat of a state police cruiser, as his corrupt world unraveled, the realization was slowly dawning that he had finally targeted the wrong person. His 28-year journey to prison had begun the moment he decided that Jasmine Carter's race made her an easy victim. It was a mistake he would have the next 3 decades to contemplate. Dawn broke over Atlanta as Jasmine Carter finally returned to her home, escorted by state police officers who would remain stationed outside for her protection. The night had stretched into a marathon of statements, evidence processing, and strategic planning. Her composed exterior remained intact, but exhaustion pulled at her every movement as she finally closed her front door and leaned against it alone for the first time since the traffic stop. Only then, in the privacy of her own home, did she allow her hands to shake, her breath to come in uneven gasps as the full emotional impact of the night's events washed over her. She had faced down corrupt officers who intended to rob her, possibly worse, and had emerged victorious due to her foresight and preparation. But the victory felt hollow when set against the knowledge that countless others had faced similar situations without her resources or connections. In her spacious kitchen, Jasmine brewed a cup of tea with trembling hands, noting with clinical detachment the bruises forming on her wrists where the handcuffs had been unnecessarily tight. These marks would be photographed later as evidence, another piece in the case being built against Wilson and Franks. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with notifications since news of the incident began spreading through government and legal circles. The governor's chief of staff had already informed her that a press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m., where Governor Reynolds would announce the formation of a special task force to investigate police corruption with the previous night's incident as its catalyst. Jasmine was not expected to speak publicly, yet a consideration for which she was grateful. Despite her outward composure, she needed time to process what had happened to transition from victim to advocate. Across town, the Atlanta Police Department headquarters had transformed into a hive of frantic activity. Commissioner Bennett had called an emergency meeting of his command staff at 3 a.m., everyone understanding that their careers might hang in the balance of how this crisis was handled. Internal affairs investigators had been dispatched to secure Wilson and Franks' lockers and desks before evidence could disappear. What they found painted a disturbing picture. Hidden in Wilson's locker behind a false panel was a collection of expensive watches, jewelry, and nearly $11,000 in cash. His personal notebook contained coded entries that appeared to reference previous stops with initials, dates, and dollar amounts. Forensic accountants were already being called in to trace deposits to his bank accounts that didn't match his salary. The commissioner, a political appointee who had risen through the ranks with minimal controversy, now faced the biggest crisis of his career. "I want absolute transparency," he instructed his staff, acutely aware that the governor's office would accept nothing less. "If there's dirt, we find it first and clean it up publicly. Anyone connected to Wilson or Franks comes under scrutiny. Any pattern of similar complaints gets reopened and investigated thoroughly." His words were met with solemn nods, though he couldn't help noticing how a few officers avoided eye contact. The implications were clear. Wilson and Franks might not have been acting alone. At the Fulton County Jail, Wilson and Franks had been processed and placed in segregated custody for their protection. The irony of the situation didn't escape the corrections officers who had them strip, shower, and change into orange jumpsuits, the same dehumanizing process that Wilson and Franks had subjected countless arrestees to over their careers. Wilson remained belligerent, insisting that he was being railroaded, that his actions had been within departmental guidelines for suspected drug interdiction. Franks, by contrast, had already requested a meeting with prosecutors, signaling his willingness to turn state's evidence against his partner and potentially others. The news cycle picked up the story with ravenous enthusiasm. By 6 a.m., all local stations had broken into regular programming with breaking news banners announcing the arrest of 2 Atlanta police officers for attempted robbery and civil rights violations. The victim's identity as a state Supreme Court justice added the explosive element of public interest that guaranteed this wouldn't be a one-day story. Social media exploded with reactions, hashtags like #Justice for Justice and #Police Accountability Now trending nationally within hours. By 7 a.m., the governor's office had received calls from the White House, the U.S. Attorney General, and multiple civil rights organizations. What might have been dismissed as an isolated incident had transformed, due to Jasmine's position and evidence, into a national conversation about racial profiling and police corruption. At 8:30 a.m., Jasmine received a personal call from the U.S. Attorney General, who informed her that the Department of Justice would be opening a formal investigation into pattern and practice violations within the Atlanta Police Department. The incident had catapulted from local scandal to federal case in less than 12 hours. "Your evidence is compelling," Justice Carter, the Attorney General, told her. "The video clearly shows a practiced routine. These officers knew what they were doing because they'd done it before. We intend to find every victim." Jasmine thanked him for the swift response, her judicial mind already calculating the legal ramifications. Federal involvement meant resources, thoroughness, and significantly higher penalties for those convicted. It also meant this case could establish precedents for similar situations nationwide. At 9:15 a.m., Jasmine's doorbell rang. Her security screen showed Dr. Elaine Washington, her closest friend since law school and a trusted confidant. Elaine entered with a medical bag and fierce determination. "I saw the news." "I'm here as your friend and your doctor," she announced, brooking no argument. "Show me your wrists." As Elaine gently examined and photographed, the bruising her professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Jasmine, when I think about what could have happened," Jasmine nodded, understanding the unspoken fear. "But it didn't, because I was prepared. Now we have to make sure no one else faces this situation, prepared or not." Do you think the system will actually hold these corrupt officers accountable, or will they find a way to minimize their punishment? Type number 1 in the comments if you believe justice will prevail in this case. Hit that like button if you think more people should install security systems like Jasmine's to protect themselves during police encounters. Have you ever taken extra precautions because you feared being profiled or unfairly targeted? What security measures do you think everyone should consider in today's world? Subscribe to find out how this case transforms from a single incident into a movement for nationwide police reform. At 10 a.m., sharp Governor Patricia Reynolds stepped up to a podium bristling with microphones, her expression grave but determined. Flanked by the State Attorney General and the Commissioner of Public Safety, she addressed a packed press room. "Last night, a distinguished member of our state Supreme Court was subjected to racial profiling, illegal detention, and attempted robbery by uniformed officers of the Atlanta Police Department. This incident was captured in its entirety by security systems installed in Justice Carter's vehicle, leaving no room for ambiguity or denial. The evidence is clear and damning." The governor paused, allowing the gravity of her words to sink in. "This administration has zero tolerance for corruption, racism, or abuse of power by those sworn to protect and serve. Effective immediately, I am establishing a special task force with full investigative powers to examine not just this incident, but the patterns and practices that may have enabled it." Reporters shouted questions, but the governor raised a hand for silence. "Justice Carter has authorized me to announce that her security footage will be made available to prosecutors and eventually to the public in appropriate form. Her technological foresight has provided us with irrefutable evidence that will serve as the foundation for meaningful reform." As the press conference continued, Jasmine watched from her living room, noting the careful political framing but appreciating the governor's unequivocal condemnation of the officer's actions. The commissioner looked uncomfortable, but committed as he announced an internal review of all complaints against the department for the past 5 years. The state attorney general confirmed that special prosecutors had been appointed to ensure impartiality. By noon, the story had gone fully national. Major networks interrupted programming with breaking news about a state Supreme Court justice racially profiled and nearly robbed by corrupt police. Legal analysts dissected the implications. Civil rights leaders called for systemic overhauls in police unions, issued carefully worded statements condemning corruption while urging against rushing to judgment about all officers. Through it all, Jasmine remained sequestered in her home, declining all interview requests, but issuing a single powerful statement through her office. "What happened to me has happened to countless others without my resources or platform. The only unusual aspect of last night's events is that the perpetrators were caught and will be held accountable. My focus now is ensuring that such accountability becomes the rule rather than the exception." By evening, as Jasmine finally allowed herself to truly rest, the first of Wilson and Frank's previous victims had begun coming forward, emboldened by the evidence and high-profile nature of the case. Their stories matched the pattern perfectly: traffic stops of minorities in expensive vehicles, manufactured probable cause intimidation, and theft disguised as civil forfeiture. The scale of the corruption was beginning to emerge, and it extended far beyond 2 rogue officers. A movement had begun, catalyzed by one woman's preparation and courage, that would ultimately transform policing not just in Atlanta, but across the nation. The justice system that had failed so many was about to experience a reckoning, all because a corrupt officer had made the fatal error of judging Justice Jasmine Carter by her race rather than her resources, resilience, and resolve. 2 weeks after the traffic stop, the Special Task Force headquarters bustled with activity that resembled a major criminal investigation command center more than a police internal affairs operation. Located in a secure floor of the State Justice Complex, the space had been quickly repurposed with digital forensic stations, evidence boards covering entire walls, and a team of investigators drawn from multiple agencies to ensure independence. At the center of one wall hung a large organizational chart that had grown exponentially since the investigation began. What had started with officers Wilson and Franks now included 12 additional officers, 3 supervisors and a deputy chief, all implicated in what was being called the most significant police corruption scandal in Georgia history. Jasmine visited the task force headquarters for the first time that morning, having recovered sufficiently from the incident to take a more active role. Her entrance caused a momentary hush as investigators recognized the woman whose case had launched their unprecedented work. Special Prosecutor Marcus Chen, a former federal prosecutor with a sterling reputation for integrity, greeted her with professional respect. "Justice Carter, thank you for coming. Your evidence has proven invaluable, but it was just the beginning." He led her to the main evidence board, where dozens of photographs were arranged in a timeline. "These are the victims we've identified so far. 28 individuals who experienced nearly identical stops by Wilson Franks or their associates. All minorities, all driving expensive vehicles, all robbed under the guise of civil forfeiture." Jasmine studied the faces, feeling a complex mixture of vindication and sorrow. "Have charges been filed in all these cases?" Chen nodded. "We're pursuing federal civil rights charges in addition to state charges for robbery, extortion, and abuse of power. The U.S. Attorney's Office is fully engaged. But the most significant development came from forensic accounting." He guided her to another section where financial flowcharts mapped a complex web of transactions. Wilson and Franks maintained offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. "We've traced over $2 million moving through these accounts over the past 3 years. They were running an organized criminal enterprise from within the police department." The scale of the corruption was staggering, even to Jasmine, who had suspected the incident wasn't isolated. "What about departmental oversight? These officers didn't operate in a vacuum." Chen's expression darkened. "That's where this gets politically complicated. We've found evidence suggesting that complaints about these officers were systematically buried. Internal affairs investigations were shut down from above. The corruption extends into the highest levels of the department." As if on cue, a breaking news alert appeared on the numerous televisions monitoring media coverage. The Atlanta Police Commissioner Bennett was announcing his resignation effective, immediately citing personal reasons but fooling no one. His departure marked the third high-ranking official to step down since the investigation began. Meanwhile, Officer Wilson's defense strategy was crumbling before it could fully form. His initial claim of entrapment had been swiftly dismissed by prosecutors and legal experts alike. His secondary defense that he was merely following unofficial departmental procedures for civil forfeiture had backfired spectacularly by implicating others and confirming the systemic nature of the corruption. His attorney had approached prosecutors about a plea deal, but Chen was holding firm. "We're not offering reduced charges. The evidence is too strong, and the public interest in full accountability is too great." Across town in a secured wing of the Fulton County Jail, Sergeant Franks was providing his 7th day of testimony, detailing the entire operation with the thoroughness of a man who understood his only hope for leniency lay in complete cooperation. He had already named 15 other officers involved in similar schemes, provided dates and locations for dozens of illegal stops, and explained how the stolen money and items were laundered or sold. Most damning was his description of the selection criteria for victims. "We specifically targeted minorities driving luxury vehicles in wealthy neighborhoods," he explained to investigators. "We knew they'd be sensitive to racial dynamics and less likely to file formal complaints. If they did complain, we had standard responses prepared to discredit them, suggesting they were playing the race card to avoid legitimate law enforcement." The cynical calculation behind their targeting revealed not just corruption, but a deliberate exploitation of racial tensions and systemic biases. For the victims now coming forward, Jasmine had established a support network through her connections with civil rights organizations and pro bono legal services. Many describe the profound impact of being targeted and robbed by those sworn to protect them, the humiliation and helplessness, and the lasting trauma that affected their sense of safety and belonging in their own communities. Some had lost valuable heirlooms or irreplaceable items with sentimental value. Others had suffered professional consequences from missed meetings or appointments while being illegally detained. Their stories painted a comprehensive picture of the human cost of corrupt policing. Public reaction to the expanding investigation reflected the polarized nature of discussions about race and policing in America. While polls showed overwhelming support for the prosecution of corrupt officers, there were concerning undercurrents of backlash. Jasmine had received numerous threats necessitating enhanced security at her home and office. Right-wing media outlets had attempted to frame the investigation as an attack on policing rather than an effort to root out corruption. Some police unions had adopted defensive postures, concerned about broader implications for officer autonomy. Governor Reynolds, however, had maintained unwavering support for the investigation, recognizing both its moral necessity and its political value. Her approval ratings had soared as she positioned herself as a champion of accountability and reform. With re-election approaching, she had transformed what could have been a damaging scandal into a powerful narrative about leadership and justice. The technological aspect of the case had sparked national interest as well. Jasmine's custom security system had become a topic of widespread discussion, with civil liberties, advocates, technology companies, and ordinary citizens debating the implications of personal surveillance as protection against authority figures. Several technology companies had approached Jasmine about developing similar systems for commercial release proposals she had declined while focusing on the case. The preliminary hearing for Wilson was scheduled for the following week, and prosecutors were confident the judge would find more than sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. Wilson's offshore accounts, the testimony of his former partner, the clear video evidence, and the growing number of victims created an overwhelming case. His attorney had begun focusing less on acquittal and more on avoiding the maximum possible sentence, a strategy shift that indicated the inevitable direction of the proceedings. As Jasmine prepared to leave the task force headquarters, Chen stopped her with one final update. "We've identified an additional pattern that's particularly disturbing. These officers weren't just targeting random minorities in luxury vehicles. They had access to DMV and tax records through police databases. They were specifically selecting people with significant assets but few political connections. They researched their victims before ever turning on their lights." The calculated nature of the targeting added another layer of premeditation to the crimes. It wasn't opportunistic corruption. It was a sophisticated criminal enterprise operating behind badges. Jasmine nodded gravely. That level of premeditation should be considered in sentencing. They abused public databases and betrayed public trust in the most fundamental way. As she walked out of the building, Jasmine noticed a small gathering of people across the street. They weren't protesters or media, but ordinary citizens holding signs with messages of support and gratitude. Many were previous victims who had found their voice and their courage through her example. Despite the threats and backlash, moments like this reminded her why the fight for accountability mattered. What had begun as one woman's terrifying traffic stop had catalyzed a movement for change that continued to gain momentum with each new revelation, each new victim who came forward, and each corrupt officer who faced the consequences of their actions. And at the center of it all was the irony that Officer Blake Wilson would never have comprehended in choosing Jasmine Carter as his target. Based on her race, he had inadvertently selected the one person with the perfect combination of resources, resilience, and resolve to bring down not just him, but an entire system of corruption. The federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta stood as a monument to justice, its neoclassical columns and imposing facade designed to inspire respect for the rule of law. On this Monday morning, that symbolism felt particularly potent as hundreds gathered on the steps and surrounding streets. News vans lined the perimeter, satellite dishes reaching skyward like mechanical flowers seeking signal instead of sun. This was the first day of United States versus Wilson, a trial that had captured national attention and would set precedents for police accountability cases for years to come. Inside the packed courtroom, Jasmine Carter sat in the front row behind the prosecution table. Though not officially part of the prosecution team, due to her role as both victim and state Supreme Court justice, her presence carried immense symbolic weight. She wore a conservative navy suit, her posture perfect, her expression revealing nothing of the complex emotions this day surely evoked. Across the aisle, Officer Blake Wilson sat beside his defense attorney Richard Daniels, a former prosecutor who had built a lucrative practice defending police officers accused of misconduct. Wilson had lost weight during his 5 months in pretrial detention, his once imposing physique diminished by jail food and limited exercise. His arrogance, however, remained intact, visible in the set of his jaw and the challenging glare he occasionally directed at Jasmine. Judge Marilyn Patel, a veteran federal judge with a reputation for strict courtroom management and impeccable fairness, called the court to order precisely at 9 a.m. The United States versus Blake Wilson, she announced, her voice carrying effortlessly through the hushed room. "Are the people ready to proceed?" Marcus Chen rose from the prosecution table. "Ready, Your Honor." "Is the defense ready?" Daniel stood, straightening his tie. "Ready, Your Honor." The formalities completed, Judge Patel turned to the jury box, where 12 citizens and 4 alternates sat with expressions ranging from nervous to solemn. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have been selected to determine the facts in an extraordinarily important case. The defendant, Blake Wilson, faces 27 federal counts, including civil rights violations, robbery under color of law, conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and corrupt practices. The prosecution will present their case first, followed by the defense. I remind you to keep an open mind until you have heard all evidence." Chen's opening statement was a masterclass in narrative clarity. He walked the jury through the events of that night using still images from Jasmine's security footage at key moments. "This case is about trust betrayed and power abused," he explained. "Officer Wilson didn't make a mistake or exercise poor judgment. Evidence will show he executed a practiced routine of targeting intimidation and theft, one he had performed dozens of times before. His badge wasn't a symbol of protection, but a tool of exploitation." When Daniels rose for the defense opening, he took a different approach. "My client acknowledges that his actions that night were inappropriate and violated departmental policy." He began, causing murmurs of surprise at the partial admission. "But the prosecution has overcharged this case, transforming procedural violations into federal crimes." Officer Wilson was following unofficial but established departmental practices for civil asset forfeiture practices he was trained to implement. The strategy became clear: admit to lesser misconduct while denying criminal intent and attempt to diffuse responsibility throughout the department. It was a risky approach that essentially acknowledged the facts while disputing their legal significance. Over the next 3 weeks, the prosecution methodically built their case. They began with Jasmine's testimony, allowing the jury to see the full security footage of the traffic stop, with her narration providing context. Her testimony was powerful precisely because of its measured tone and absence of inflammatory language. She recounted events with judicial precision, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. The technological evidence proved devastating to the defense. Forensic experts testified to the authenticity of the recordings, confirming they had not been altered or edited. The multiple camera angles and crystal-clear audio left no room for ambiguity about Wilson's words or actions. Even more damning was the evidence that emerged when investigators had searched Wilson's home and examined his financial records. A hidden safe contained jewelry, watches, and cash that former victims had identified as stolen during similar stops. His offshore accounts showed deposits corresponding to dates of previous traffic stops he had conducted. His personal computer contained a spreadsheet listing targets by initials with notes about their vehicles and estimated net worth. Former Sergeant Michael Franks provided the most explosive testimony as part of his plea agreement. Over 2 full days on the stand, he detailed the entire operation from its inception to its procedures to the division of profits. He described how they selected victims, the psychological tactics they employed, and how they covered their tracks administratively. "We specifically looked for wealthy minorities," Franks testified, "because they were less likely to file complaints, and if they did, those complaints were less likely to be believed." When asked directly if Wilson knew their actions were criminal, Franks was unequivocal. "Of course he did. We both did. That's why we turned off body cameras, falsified reports, and hid the proceeds offshore. You don't take those precautions if you think you're conducting legitimate police business." As the prosecution case neared completion, they presented testimony from 15 previous victims, each describing nearly identical experiences. The pattern was undeniable, the targeting explicit, and the trauma evident as these individuals recounted their experiences of powerlessness and humiliation at the hands of corrupt officers. The defense case, by contrast, struggled to gain traction. Their primary strategy of portraying Wilson as following unofficial departmental practices backfired when high-ranking officers, including those who had resigned rather than face charges, testified that no such practices were sanctioned. Wilson himself chose not to testify, a decision that visibly disappointed some jurors who had likely wanted to hear his explanation directly. In closing arguments, Chen focused on the betrayal of public trust. "A police officer who uses his badge to rob citizens doesn't just steal money or property," he told the jury. "He steals faith in the system, trust in authority, and the sense of security we all deserve." Officer Wilson didn't make a mistake. He built a criminal enterprise around the calculated abuse of his position and the exploitation of racial dynamics in our society. Daniels, in his closing, attempted to humanize Wilson while conceding much of the factual case. "Blake Wilson made terrible choices," he acknowledged. "But he's not the mastermind of some grand conspiracy that the prosecution portrays. He's a flawed man who followed a corrupt path that others before him had established. His actions deserve consequences, but not the excessive punishment the government seeks." The jury deliberated for just 7 hours before reaching unanimous verdicts on all counts guilty. As the court clerk read each count and verdict, Wilson remained expressionless, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. Jasmine similarly maintained her composed demeanor, though those sitting nearby noticed her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Judge Patel scheduled sentencing for 1 month later, ordering Wilson to remain in custody. Outside the courthouse, Chen addressed the waiting media. "Today's verdict sends a clear message that a badge is not a license to commit crimes. No one is above the law, especially those entrusted to enforce it." When asked about the pending cases against other officers implicated in the investigation, he added, "This is just the beginning of accountability, not the end." The sentencing hearing a month later drew even more attention than the trial. Victim impact statements filled the morning session with individuals describing the lasting effects of being targeted, humiliated, and robbed by police officers. Many spoke of lost trust in institutions, anxiety during routine traffic stops, and the particular pain of explaining to their children why those meant to protect them had instead victimized them. When Wilson was given the opportunity to speak, he offered a statement that many found more calculating than contrite. "I recognize that my actions have caused harm," he said, reading from prepared notes. "I accept responsibility and ask for the opportunity to make amends through a reasonable sentence that allows me to eventually return to society as a contributing member." Judge Patel's sentencing remarks, however, suggested she found little sincerity in his statement. "Mr. Wilson, you have been convicted of extraordinary breaches of public trust," she began. "You didn't simply break the law. You weaponized it against the very citizens you swore to protect. You specifically targeted individuals based on their race, exploiting historical and ongoing vulnerabilities in our society for your personal gain." She continued, her voice growing firmer. "The evidence shows these were not impulsive actions, but calculated crimes repeated dozens of times over years. You maintained offshore accounts, falsified official records, and intimidated victims into silence. Most disturbing is your complete lack of remorse throughout these proceedings." The courtroom held its collective breath as she delivered the sentence, 28 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole, followed by 5 years of supervised release. Additionally, you are ordered to make restitution to all identified victims in the amount of $2.6 million. The sentence exceeded even the prosecution's recommendations, sending gasps through the courtroom. Wilson finally showed emotion, his face contorting with shock and anger as he was led away by marshals. Outside the courthouse, in a brief statement to the press, Jasmine struck a measured tone that balanced accountability with forward focus. Today's sentence reflects the severity of crimes committed by someone entrusted with extraordinary power. While accountability for past actions is essential, our greater challenge lies in preventing such abuses in the future. The systemic reforms currently being implemented must continue regardless of media attention or political cycles. As she concluded her statement and turned to leave, a reporter called out asking if the sentence brought her closure. Jasmine paused, considering the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Justice isn't about closure," she finally replied. "It's about restoration of trust and affirmation of values. Today is one step in that ongoing process." With those words, she departed, leaving behind a legacy case that would be cited in police accountability proceedings for decades to come. Blake Wilson's 28-year sentence would stand as both a personal reckoning and a powerful symbol of a justice system, finally willing to hold its own accountable, regardless of the badge they wore or the power they had once wielded. 1 year after Officer Blake Wilson received his 28-year sentence, Jasmine Carter stood at a podium in the White House Rose Garden. The spring air carried the scent of blooming flowers as she prepared to accept her appointment as chair of the Presidential Commission on Law Enforcement Accountability and Reform. Behind her sat dignitaries including governors, congressional leaders, civil rights activists, and police chiefs from major cities across America. All had gathered to witness what many considered the culmination of a movement that had begun with one traffic stop and grown into a national reckoning. "The measure of justice is not found in a single verdict or sentence," Jasmine began, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed gathering. "True justice emerges when we transform painful incidents into lasting systemic change. What happened to me 1 year ago was not unique or unprecedented. What was unprecedented was the accountability that followed and the reforms it has inspired. In the 12 months since Wilson's sentencing, the ripple effects had spread far beyond Atlanta. The comprehensive security system that Jasmine had installed in her vehicle, now known nationwide as the Carter Protocol, had been adapted for public use through a nonprofit foundation she established. The system offered at subsidized rates to vulnerable communities combined dashcam technology, automatic cloud uploading, GPS tracking, and emergency notifications to ensure that every police interaction was transparently documented. The foundation had already distributed over 50,000 units, with another 100,000 in production. More significantly, 17 states had passed legislation requiring police departments to implement similar transparency measures in all patrol vehicles, with federal incentives supporting the transition. The protocols had been embraced by progressive police leaders who recognized that accountability protected not only citizens but also ethical officers whose actions could now be verified beyond dispute. In Georgia, Governor Reynolds had successfully championed the Police Accountability Act, the most comprehensive reform package in the state's history. The legislation eliminated qualified immunity for officers who violated clearly established rights, created civilian oversight boards with subpoena power, mandated independent investigations of all use of force incidents, and established stringent new hiring standards. Most controversially, it required all civil asset forfeitures to be approved by a judge within 24 hours, with the burden of proof placed on law enforcement rather than citizens. The governor's leadership on these reforms had transformed her into a national voice on police accountability, boosting her from a modestly popular state executive to a potential presidential contender. The special task force that had begun by investigating Wilson and Franks had ultimately identified 63 officers involved in similar schemes across Georgia. 42 had been convicted or accepted plea agreements. 9 awaited trial, and the remainder had resigned and surrendered their law enforcement certifications. The financial investigation had recovered over $11 million in stolen assets, most of which had been returned to victims or, when victims couldn't be identified, directed to community restoration funds in the neighborhoods most impacted by corrupt policing. Former Sergeant Michael Franks, whose cooperation had been instrumental in dismantling the corruption network, had received a reduced sentence of 12 years. From prison, he had recorded training videos for police academies nationwide, detailing how corruption begins, spreads, and becomes normalized within departments. His candid accounts of rationalization and escalation had become required viewing for cadets and ethics instructors alike. Blake Wilson, meanwhile, had exhausted his appeals and settled into the reality of his 28-year sentence at a federal correctional facility in Colorado. His case had become a cautionary tale, referenced in law enforcement training across the country, his name synonymous with abuse of power. His only public statement since imprisonment had come through his attorney, a brief expression of regret that many viewed as strategic rather than sincere. The victims of Wilson and his associates had formed a support and advocacy network that had grown into a powerful voice for reform. Many had discovered a sense of purpose in transforming their trauma into activism. They regularly testified before legislative committees, consulted on police training programs, and spoke at community forums about their experiences and the changes they envisioned. Their collective voice had helped shift the narrative around police accountability from an adversarial framework to one focused on community safety and mutual respect. For Jasmine personally, the year had brought both challenges and opportunities. The threats against her had continued, requiring ongoing security measures that limited her previous freedom of movement. Yet her influence had expanded exponentially, her measured voice and judicial perspective bringing clarity to complex debates about policing, race, and accountability. She had recused herself from cases directly related to the corruption scandal, but continued her broader judicial work with a deeper understanding of the justice system's vulnerabilities. The Carter Protocols are not just about technology, she continued in her White House address. They represent a fundamental shift in the power dynamic between citizens and law enforcement. When interactions are transparent, when evidence is irrefutable, when accountability is assured, both officers and citizens can focus on their shared interest in community safety rather than fear or distrust of one another. As she spoke, Jasmine could see both police leaders and civil rights activists nodding in agreement, an alignment that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. The centrist approach she had championed, focusing on transparency and accountability rather than defunding or defending policing as institutions, had created space for productive collaboration across previous divides. The reforms sparked by her case had avoided the pendulum swings of political reaction that often characterize justice initiatives, instead building sustainable changes with broad support. Today we launch a commission that will examine best practices, nationwide, identify remaining barriers to accountability, and develop model legislation that balances public safety with civil liberties, Jasmine explained. Our goal is not perfection but progress, not revolution but evolution toward a justice system worthy of its name. As she concluded her remarks to sustained applause, Jasmine reflected on the journey from that night on Peachtree Road to this Rose Garden ceremony. The traumatic traffic stop that could have been just another unaccounted injustice had instead become the catalyst for meaningful change. Her preparation and resilience had transformed a moment of vulnerability into a movement for accountability. Still, as she looked out at the assembled dignitaries and considered the work ahead, Jasmine harbored no illusions about the challenges that remained. Systemic change was always slower and more difficult than individual accountability. The reforms implemented thus far represented progress but not completion of the journey toward equitable justice. Corrupt officers like Wilson were symptoms of deeper problems that required ongoing vigilance and commitment to address. As the ceremony concluded, and Jasmine prepared to begin her commission work, she thought about the next generation of young black women who would drive the streets of America's cities. They would still face prejudice and profiling, still navigate systems not designed with them in mind. But they would do so with new protections, new technologies, and new precedents established in part through her experience. The road ahead remained long, but it was measurably better than the one she had traveled that night a year ago. Do you believe technological solutions like the Carter Protocol can truly help protect people from corrupt authority figures? Hit the like button if you think everyone should have access to similar security systems. Comment number 1. If you feel personal recording devices should be standard equipment for every driver. Would you install such a system in your vehicle? How would you improve the Carter Protocol to make it even more effective at ensuring justice? Thank you for watching this incredible true story of courage and accountability. If you found this story inspiring, please subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives about justice, resilience, and systemic change. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the importance of preparation and documentation when facing potential abuse of power. Together, we can support the ongoing work of building more transparent, accountable systems that protect everyone's rights and dignity. This story powerfully illustrates how preparation can transform vulnerability into strength. Jasmine's security system wasn't just technology, it was strategic protection against a reality she understood all too well. It demonstrates how individual accountability can catalyze systemic reform. One corrupt officer's actions exposed an entire network of corruption, leading to widespread changes in policy and practice. The importance of documentation cannot be overstated. In situations where it would otherwise be one person's word against another's irrefutable evidence, changes the dynamic completely. The case highlights how racial profiling exploits systemic weaknesses, targeting those perceived as vulnerable. The officers specifically chose minorities, believing they would be less likely to report crimes or be believed if they did. Finally, it shows the transformative power of turning personal trauma into public advocacy. Jasmine didn't just seek justice for herself, she created pathways for others to find justice too. The Carter Protocol represents more than a security system. It's a symbol of how individuals can protect themselves while also driving institutional change. True justice requires both holding individuals accountable and reforming the systems that enabled their abuses. Have you ever experienced or witnessed profiling or abuse of power? How would you react if placed in Jasmine's situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you install a security system like the Carter Protocol in your vehicle? Type number 1 in the comments if you believe everyone should have access to such protection. How can we balance effective law enforcement with proper accountability? What other reforms do you think are needed to prevent situations like the one Jasmine faced? If this story of justice and accountability moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful, true stories of people standing up against systemic injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the importance of preparation and documentation when facing potential abuse of power. Together, we can support the ongoing work of building more transparent, accountable systems that protect everyone's rights and dignity. Thank you for watching, and remember, preparation meets opportunity to create lasting change.